Angela, and then I am going to start live streaming here. So we will begin in just a moment.
Okay.
All right, we're just preparing to stream here, so we'll get going. Good afternoon, everybody. It says preparing, but I'm sure it's probably started here, so we'll get going. Good afternoon. My name is Araya Harley, and I am the Communications and the Events Manager for the Kent Chamber of Commerce. And some of you folks, this is our series 2 of 3 of grant writing workshops. So if you have not attended the first one, you can definitely shoot us an email and we can provide that recording to you. But today our grant writing session will be streaming live on Facebook. We also are recording this. So again, as I mentioned, if you do need to receive this recording for some reason, please shoot me an email or message us on Facebook and we'll be happy to provide that to you. And as I mentioned, Angela Bird is going to present for us today in our grant writing session. If you have any questions, feel free to open up the chat. I will help her with the chat. Also on Facebook, if there are any questions, you can either join or message us on Facebook. And I will go ahead and turn it over to Angela.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Hi, everyone. I am Angela Beard, and I am with it's quite a mouthful, the Fundraising Academy at City University of Seattle. And I run the Fundraising Academy there, and our mission is to support the nonprofit sector by providing fundraising training for free or low cost to the community, to Washington State, really any nonprofit folks that need it. It is my job, which I love, to try to help you out as best I can by providing fundraising nonprofit training. So I'm thrilled to be doing this, and we've got a lot of material, so I'm just going to hop right on into it. We're going to talk today about the need statement and the project description parts of a grant application. So I didn't get this right last time. I had to use the arrows. There we go. So what I want you to be able to do as when we finish this in one short hour is to understand the need statement, it's also called the problem statement, or the opportunity statement. There's a lot of terminology in grant land that crosses over, and its parts. And then craft a compelling, thorough, and by thorough I mean including all the different moving pieces, description of a project for which you seek funding. Before we roll, I just want to point out that funders have so many different ways of being approached, if you will. They all have different forms, they all want different information, they all call the same information different things and all. This presentation is really kind of conventional, middle of the road foundation type application and grant writing. There's no way I could cover all of what every funder wants, but I've found in my 4 zillion years of writing grants that if you have a good section, say on evaluation, your funder's asking you for measurement, impact measurement. How are you going to know that you achieve what you wanted to? It takes a minute. You look at it and you're like, okay, measurement, what? And then it's like, oh yeah, they want to hear how we're going to evaluate. So learning how to translate some of those items on your app that are requested for your application is a skill in and of itself. I've got nomenclature that I use, but I will do my best to tell you the other words that are used, sometimes the other approaches that are used, etc. We're going to spend a little more time on the need statement than on the project description, because most folks know their project back and forward. They work with it every day. They live with it 8 hours a day and 5 days a week, and probably 6 or 7 in some cases. So that one isn't as daunting and challenging as the need statement is. The need statement is, so we'll spend more time on that. And without, always ask questions. Like, I have an eye on the chat as well. And without any further ado, let's just hop on in. So what is a need statement? Anyone want to take a stab at it? Some of you probably already know because you've been doing this for a while, or most of you probably have a good idea. A need statement is a part of the grant application that describes the need or the problem facing those your organization intends to serve. And it's really important to understand that this is about the community. It is not about the solution. It is not about your project. It is not about the organization's needs. It is about the community's needs. Okay. And it's not, and this is a hard one for, I teach this course frequently. And this one is always a hard one for my students because it is not your opinion that is unsupported by evidence. So like I said, you folks all are out there doing good work that I think most of you think is important, right? Is critical to improving the health or the welfare of the community. But not everyone will agree with you on what is funding worthy, what is the most important need in the community, there's a lot of competition out there is what I'm trying to say. So you might be so gung-ho on fire about trying to offer literacy programs to pre-kindergarten children. And that is super important. But to think that everyone agrees and that everyone understands how important that is what we call universalizing your passion, okay? You have to make sure that your claims are substantiated by evidence of what literacy programs do, how they change people, what impact they have on their lives, right? Another thing I always throw out at my students when we start talking about writing the need statement is, okay, I hate to say favorite, but one of the things I, Angela Beard, feel most passionately about is childhood hunger. And you're going to see that in this talk because I'm going to use it as an example, right? And I always start with my students when we talk about the need statement. I'm like, okay, what is the problem for children that don't get enough to eat in the summertime? And they all look at me like I'm insane, right? They're like, what do you mean? Kids going hungry? How do you know? Of course, that's a problem. Well, the common person, anyone on the street would probably say, yeah, that's a problem, but we're grant writers, right? We are out there competing with cancer and homelessness, and there are any number of worthy, valuable, critical causes that are very deserving of funding, right? So just the mere fact that we think childhood literacy programs should always be funded and overfunded, yeah, in a perfect world, right? But this isn't a perfect world. So the need statement is important to show the funder why the need your program addresses is urgent, what its spread is, who's affected, what is the cost to them, etc. Okay, just in case you're not sold on it yet, that's why it's so critical and really has to be well done. So the need statement has these 6 elements, right? And like I said, I am going down a conventional, fairly established, and by established I mean in business for more than 2 or 3 years, nonprofit of any size. Some of this will be different for startup programs, for new nonprofits, et cetera. And I'm happy to consult with you on those if you have those questions. But if there's something you don't get out of this, but for today, this is all kind of middle of the road. Okay. So within a need statement, we most likely want to discuss the incidents, the cost of the problem that we're facing, our community's facing, where the gaps are in service, what some promising solutions are, nice segue into our own note, and then what possible barriers there might be to our target group or our clients' participation. All right, now we're going to go through these one at a time, and using the fictitious example that I made up and sort of did a little research on to show you, to help demonstrate this need statement thing. In Skycomish, I believe the city is in the example here. So let's go on and talk about, first of all, what is the incidence of the problem? That's the first thing on paper when you are writing a need statement, okay? So, and I put in these slides some, when I'm writing these things, what it helps me to think about, how I answer these questions, right? So what is the problem and who says it's a problem? And what is supporting evidence? All right, so again, childhood hunger in the summertime in a city where they don't have a child, lots of cities have them, they don't have a feeding program for kids. That's the topic of my soon to be new nonprofit that I'm seeking funding for. So I could seek out any of this evidence, statistical evidence, which I'm going to show you, testimonial evidence, anecdotal, or analogical. This is for new work, new unresearched, etc. Okay, everybody with me so far? I'm moving kind of fast because there's so much to cover. All right, and I'm going to be looking for this data. How many people are affected by this problem? What's their age and gender? What's their ethnicity and the languages they speak? Who are these folks is what you're trying to figure out. To the extent that you can, what's their income level? Education, what's their health status? And this, again, different funders and different nonprofits will be looking for different things. This is a very comprehensive list. All of this probably will not apply to one single grant application. What's their family structure and size, and where are they located? Location is important, obviously for service delivery, but also because of funders that are geographically specific, okay? What causes the problem? Sticking with my example, I just want to point out to y'all, this is where a lot of people get hung up because it is a rabbit hole. And you have to be, I hate this term because everybody uses it, laser focused on the program that you're offering that for which you are seeking funding. Here's the example. We want to talk about the factors that contribute to the problem of the circumstances creating the need. Remember, we are trying to start a summer feeding program for kids in the town of Skykomish, which is, I don't even know where it is, to be honest with you. It's somewhere in Snohomish County, I believe. But it was the large enough population that did not have a summer feeding program that made me select it. So what's the problem? If there's no summer feeding problem, okay, well, who cares? I mean, that's also something I always ask myself. Why does this matter? Well, we don't want kids going hungry, right? What causes kids to go hungry? And now this is where you start down the rabbit hole and your laser focus has to be maintained. Anyone out there care to throw out a reason why kids go without meals in the summertime? You don't have to be an expert on this. I see a hand raised. Eagle's Nest, what do you think?
Well, the reason why children go hungry during the summertime because of lack of programs, lack of access to food.
Okay.
They eat more when they're at home because usually when they're in school, they receive lunch programs through the school. So if your child is at school at 6 hours a day, now they're at home those extra 6. So now they're eating, they're consuming more food.
Right. So you've given me 3 causes already: lack of access, longer times, less, they eat more when they're at home, and there was a third one, right? It was low income. Sorry to interrupt you. Excuse me.
I would say the third one would be living in areas. Majority of children that receive free lunch live in food swamps. So there is no nutritional value where you're living in a food area where there's food swamps because there is no grocery stores that are affordable. They live close to what we call a food desert and a food swamp
desert.
because
Okay.
the food the food desert, and we have the food swamp where they're swamped with your 7-Elevens, and you have versus nutritional food. You
Right.
have at a 7-Eleven, you have a carton of eggs that are $4.76 versus if you were living closer to a grocery store, which is $1.26. So if they're on food stamps or SNAP, they're spending more now, triple the
Gotcha.
amount. And their food, which usually lasts for a month, is probably going to last maybe maybe 2 weeks.
Gotcha. Yeah, so you're giving me even more causes of this problem. And we've got Ann Anderson saying, and yes, kids that depend on school programs don't have those programs available during the summer. So there's a lot of causes. When you start your research, like I said, you go down the rabbit hole, and you, of course, will probably come to the conclusion, if you haven't already, that the biggest factor, of course, is poverty. Lack of money to buy food, access to healthy food, access to meal sites, not enough awareness of what's out there, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. So, is poverty the problem in the case of this summertime feeding program? That's a loaded question. Do we think yes or no? Thumbs up or thumbs down? Is poverty the problem that we're trying to address with this program? The answer, oh, we've got one hand thumb up. The answer is, don't hate me, no. If we could claim to address poverty and solve it, fix it, whatever you want to say, with a single program, we'd all go to Disneyland, right? We are going to address some of the outcomes of poverty, but it is far too complicated and pervasive of a problem for us to claim to be able to solve with one summertime feeding program. That's the rabbit hole you got to be careful about going down, okay? Yes, you're absolutely correct. Poverty and low-income families are also more likely to suffer from food insecurity. It is definitely a factor in there, but not, I would put to you, not the one that we want to focus on realistically for this. We could talk about it, absolutely, in the correlations, but the problem we are trying to solve is that the kids in our town are not eating enough during summer months because they're not in school for all the reasons that have been identified, right? Access, etc. Right? Is everybody with me? Does everybody see why it's a tempting but risky business trying to go down the we're going to solve poverty problem? At least for this grant application, keep your hopes, your heads held high, and your hopes active for one day there will be no poverty. Won't that be a happy day? But our program is not going to solve it entirely. All right, but it is a contributing factor. So you want to and I've got my sources down here. I think my bar thing is covering them up for where I found all this data. But the causes of our problem are lack of access and to money to buy food, the fact that it's summertime, and the fact that we live in a town with no program, no feeding program. Well said. We should be conscious about how to fill up our plate rather than biting off more than we can chew. I agree. So moving forward, why isn't this working? Sorry, folks. There we go. However, it's also important to avoid falling into what's called circular reasoning and claiming that the problem in your community is the lack of your solution. All right? Then, of course, you conveniently offer your solution as a way to solve the problem. Let's take another example and talk about a town with no senior center. Okay? Is the problem that there's no senior center? Thumbs up, thumbs down. This is hard stuff, so don't be shy about it. I would put to you that the lack of a senior center is not the problem. Isolation, poor nutrition, lack of fellowship, medical access, whatever a senior center provides that is missing for these older folks, and the poor outcomes, the health, depression, increased suicide rates, the things that go along with those, that's the problem, okay? If there's a town, let's be a little ridiculous, say there's a town where there are no seniors. Well, do we need a senior center? It's not a problem not to have one, right? Or a town where everybody's seniors are scrillionaires and can afford anything they like and have people they pay to hang out with them, etc. I'm being absolutely ridiculous and theatrical to make a point that the problem is not the lack of your solution. The problem is the outcomes, that usually unfavorable outcomes in the community that happen as a result of folks not having access to the services you wish to provide. Does that make sense to everybody? The big mistake I made myself as a young grant writer to say, well, you know, the arts make everybody's lives better, so not having the community isn't of self, is the problem. No. The problem is you know, the sense of community that we lose out on, the sense of inspiration, the economic impact of the arts. You know, those are the arguments I had to learn how to make, and it's hard. So let's keep plugging along. All right. So we've talked about the incidence of the problem and the causes. Now, what are the costs of the problem if left unaddressed? What are the effects in the community? Okay. And another way to think about this one is, what would happen if your nonprofit went away? Make sense to everybody? So what are the costs of not having kids eating in the summertime? They go hungry for 3 months. What are some of those costs?
Maybe a loss of life. Yeah.
Yes, very possibly. Eagle's Nest. I'm sorry, I don't know your name. I hate to keep calling you that, but please, what have you got to say? You got your hand up.
Malnutrition, it would cause health issues.
Mm-hmm.
It would cause depression.
Yep.
It would cause stress. It would cause trauma, because when a child saying I'm hungry, a parent can get frustrated, and it's not a good thing when a parent feels that they cannot provide for their child. So there's possible abuse.
Yep. And again, with this kind of example, it seems pretty straightforward, right? There doesn't seem to be a need to document that kids going hungry has costs, but it is your job to show what they are. And especially someone like you, Eagle, who works with this all the time, might seem like such a dumb moment, but your funder doesn't work with food insecurity 8 hours a day. And I'm not picking on you, but you know, you're a great example of why you have to go out and say, and you literally can Google this, right? Effects of childhood hunger. And you will get a wealth of data and statistics from all kinds of reputable sources talking about the health outcomes, the morbidity, the depression, the abuse, which I'm sure you know what you're talking about. That's something I didn't think about, so thank you for that. And this is what you use in your need statement. If these kids are not fed in the summertime, and I'm paraphrasing, this is what's going to happen. X, Y, and Z that you just found from your Google search, right? Everybody with me? Making sense? Okay. Now we're going to look at, and this is where my specific example really comes in, we're going to talk about gaps in service. We've established that childhood hunger is a problem, what causes it, and what happens if it goes unchecked, right? Now, in Skycomish, Washington, there is no no summer feeding program. And there are kids that live there. You've already documented this in your opening, right? There are, 18,000 children of K through 12 age. The poverty level is this, so this many are liable to go hungry. This is what's going to happen to them if we allow it. And the reason the gap in the service is that the town does not have a summertime feeding program. And you can, say, yes, there's some in the city of Seattle, King County has them, Northwest Harvest, there are all kinds of examples of what existing feeding programs there are, but the gap is access. The closest program to Skykomish, and I remember this specifically, is in Issaquah, which is 36 miles away. Now, how are these kids going to get there? There's probably not a bus if they were even able to take it. Can their parents get out of work to drive them to be fed? I doubt it. So yeah, this is your real problem, that the closest thing is 36 miles away, right? And that is why you're seeking funding for this solution, okay? And this one applies, so the fourth one applies more to newer programs or newer organizations. Once you've identified and discussed the problem, if it's a new program that is untested, but you who are the experts know that it's worked in other communities, that it's worked in, you've read about it, you could bring that up and say, okay, we know that feeding programs in Seattle or in Bellevue or wherever you want to identify as the most promising strategy, because maybe the demographics are similar to yours or whatever, this works. So the answer you're looking for is, how is the program being successfully addressed in general in other communities, right? So you would describe a couple that are being successfully run, but make the point that because there's no access, kids in Skykomish are still going to go hungry unless something is done about it. And wouldn't you love to partner with us to do something about that problem? So far, so good? Okay. Before we go on to addressing the problem, which is your solution, your program, I want to give you a little hint that I will put in these slides before I send them to Zenobia to be emailed out to you, but I blew it and I didn't put it in, but this is what I give my students when I ask them to start putting together a needs statement, because it's so easy to go awry on the needs statement. It's easy to go down the rabbit hole. It's easy to start right in and talk about the program and the solution because you feel very strongly about it, right? So let me just give you the 3-sentence needs statement that I ask my students to do and share in class, limiting them to 1 response each. So the first one, you get to write 3 bullets, is what is the problem? The second one is what causes the problem? 1 bullet. And the third one is what is the cost of the community? And you get 3 on this one if this problem remains unaddressed. And that's where you start. That keeps you focused on talking about the problem and not the solution, not ancillary causes, etc. Hope that's helpful. I'll put a new slide in to be sent out to you. Any questions on the need statement? This is hard stuff, so don't be shy. Ready to move on? Okay, here we go. On to the really fun stuff. This is the exciting stuff, the hopeful stuff. This is a we can do it, we got this stuff. So addressing the problem, again, may be called the solution, it may be called the project narrative or description, it may be called methodology. There are a lot. This is what you are going to do to address this problem that you've just so beautifully described and is, has serious impact. what's called the grant narrative, or what I call the grant narrative, has 4 main sections with any number of subsections within them, okay? But these 4 are called goals and objectives, method activities, sustainability, and evaluation. Now, evaluation is a big enough topic that I'm leaving it for our next meeting next week. So we'll talk today about the first 3, goals and objectives, method activities, and sustainability. Everybody know what I'm talking about when I throw these things out? Any questions? Getting kind of growly, sorry about that. All right. So starting out with goals. And this is kind of related, all of this ties back to the need statement, and it also will tie forward, if you will, to your evaluation, all right? So the question I always ask myself or my students when we start on talking about the goals for the project is, what is the change you plan to see as a result of your work? And everybody's probably sick to death of SMART goals, but they do make sense. We want them to, for this, we want to focus on them being specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound, okay? So let's think of what that might look like for our summer feeding program. All right, now, for goals and evaluation, and please jump into this if you've had if you disagree or have had a different experience. There's a difference between what's called outputs and outcomes. And so while our goals are both short and long term, most likely for this example anyhow, and I'd love to hear others if you have a better illustration, we're going to have to focus on the short-term outputs of the program. What we'd like to be able to say is that because we're going to feed these kids this summer, they will do better in school, they will not fall into depression, they will be healthy 5 years from now, etc. We might not always be around to measure the long-term goals, the real deep impacts of our program. So we focus instead on the short term, which are, we want to, between June and August, provide 500 meals a week to, 1,500 children in Skycomish, give the zip code or whatever. And that we will then consider this program a success. Does everybody get what I'm talking about? It's kind of like the poverty rabbit hole. I mean, yes. And I've seen professional grant writers do this, and I've had to rein them back in and say, look, yeah, we would like to believe that we're going to address poverty through this program, and in a small, important way we will. But we aren't going to cure poverty with this program. We have to focus on what we can do between June and September with the money we have, the resources we have, the time we have, etc. And one day when we're all, one day when we're all fabulously wealthy, there will be no more kids going hungry in the summer. But my point being, one day when we have better resources, we can perhaps do a longitudinal study that follows the kids for 5 years and says, okay, did they have better outcomes than if they had not been fed in the summer of 2021? Maybe some folks are doing that now. I'd like to hear more about it if you are, because that's the big kahuna, right? That's the ultimate knowledge that we haven't indeed succeeded. But we have to work with what we have. And right now, our goals have to be tied to the need, which is childhood hunger in Skycomish in the summer, and the evaluation, right? So we're going to be able to have to go back to our funder and say, you gave us X number of dollars to feed, to provide 500 meals a week from June to August to this many kids, and we did it. In fact, we exceeded it, or however the reality turned out, right? Your goals and your evaluation have to match up, and they have to be working with the problem that you've just identified, right? Everybody with me? How y'all doing? How am I doing? Am I on time? Oh, good. Yes. All right. So goals. Sometimes they will also be called objectives. This is when the grantee starts to make you kind of crazy, right? I've read, and I put a resource at the end, a good piece that talked about goals as being the 30,000 foot view, objectives being the specific pinpoints with each one. So your goal would be to feed, in that case, your goal would be to feed hungry kids in the summer in Skykomish. And then your objectives would be to provide 500 meals to this part of number 1, to this class or this group of children would be number 2, in this location would be number 3, right? So depending on how the funder wants you to answer the question, goals and objectives may be interchangeable or may refer to a larger overarching goal broken into specific objectives, kind of like a to-do list, if you will, right? Everybody with me so far? Does that make sense? Okay, excellent. Project description, methods, methodology all mean the same thing. How are you going to accomplish this goal is the question that you're asking yourself when you write this section of your grant, okay? It's the who, when, where, and how of your activities, precisely what you're going to do to address childhood hunger. And I would urge you, as part of your project description, to include in it the planning that will take place before you actually begin to implement the project and the evaluation that will take place after you finish up your project, even if it's as simple as speaking with the people serving the food or the project participants or their parents or the school district, whoever has contact with these children and can tell you how it affected them, right? Not all of us can afford a big evaluator, but we want to know how we did so that we can either be confident that we are doing the right thing or make adjustments where necessary to get us to that goal that we're trying to reach. Make sense? You should also, I believe, include money for planning and evaluation. Your budget's going, which we talk about next week as well, reflects your narrative. It's a dollars attached to what you plan to do. So be sure to include the staff salaries in there. If you hire an evaluator, if you have to produce a survey, whatever, include that and mark it as for evaluation. So the funder knows that you're not just talking, right? That you actually plan to do it and incorporate the feedback that you get. Obstacles. What obstacles do you anticipate and how will you address them? This is something that I can't, other than noting that you really need to include it, not being a subject matter expert, this is where it's up to you. What are we going to run into out there when we actually go and in this situation try to feed these kids? I mean, you might find that they can't get there, or that there's not a facility that has a sufficient kitchen, or what's going to happen. You can't get the word out. Think of it ahead of time so the funder knows you're thinking about it, and tell them what you're going to do to address that problem. This might happen. Not going to say it is going to happen, but this could happen because we know that community and we know what obstacles we may face going in there to try to implement this program. I'm looking in the chat. Gaining trust, yes. Outreach to convey the times, dates, and distribution sites. Absolutely, Anne. And this is just for this fictitious example. You folks, being the experts in your field, know much better than I do what they might be for your own particular situation. But this shows you've done your due diligence. It shows the funder you're not just, la la la, tra la la. We're gonna go in and everything's gonna be fine, and no, because nothing ever goes the way it's supposed to, right? And let's show that we're aware of that we have ideas about what some of these obstacles might be, and we're prepared to face them. Personnel, we're going to want to describe the project director, the key personnel who are going to be involved in your program, and then a timeline. And again, please do include your planning and evaluation. In this example, the feeding program goes from June until August. So we would probably start planning, I don't know, my Eagle's Nest friend helped me out. I would guess no later than January, right? Because you got to find a facility, you've got to start looking for food suppliers, you've got to hire folks, you've got to, and this is maybe before you even know if you have funding, right? You've got to get any necessary permits. There are all kinds of stuff that have to be undertaken before you can actually open up shop. So put your planning in there, and I would say January through probably September or October, once you've wound up, checked with everybody, had a couple meetings post-mortem to talk about how well it worked and what didn't and what needs to change, and consult your partners, etc. So you've got your timetable is not simply June to August. Okay, everybody with me? Does that make sense? Something to be said here about timetables and grants. If you're on the ball, and you all are, you're writing this grant for a program that happens in, sorry, my Chihuahua decided to come and visit, for a program that happens from, let's say it would be next year, June, August 2022, right? Well, here we are in March, for a few days, of 2021. So we're probably already starting to think about grant writing for this project before it's even implemented, over a year before it's even implemented, because grant turnaround time is anywhere from 3 to 6 months, and we start our planning in January, right? So we're starting to look for prospects. We're starting to write a project description and a need now, today. A lot of you new grant writers, or my students are a perfect example. That makes them very uncomfortable. They start getting squirrely because we don't know exactly what's going to happen. We don't know who we're going to hire. We don't know how much it's going to cost. This is where you get to do what I call realistic hopefulness, or projection, if you will. And something to understand, if you don't already, is that the funders do get this. People that I've worked with get very nervous about committing to paper something that's most likely going to change. If we start applying for funds today for a program that starts in January, it's almost guaranteed to change between now and then. Costs are going to change, locations going to change, whatever. Know that you can write about today as much detail as you have today, and you'll be okay. Your project, your location needs to change, and you find this out in September, in 4 or 5 months, whatever that is, no problem. You call your funder and you say, look, we had to go with a new location. The other one got, hit by lightning. Here's how it's going to impact the project, if at all. And then they'll say, oh, that's fine. Or they'll say, okay, can you submit an addendum or whatever. But my big point in this is, don't freak out about talking about something that is likely to change, because the funders do get it. Your job is to have a good enough relationship with those funders that you can call them and say, hey, we had to change this. What do you think? Is that still okay? Does that still fall within the parameters of the funding viability of the your restrictions? And usually they'll say yes. All right. So we've got our methods, our obstacles, our personnel, and our timeline down. What is the story on this arrow key? Sorry. Now let's talk about sustainability. Same thing applies, all right? So when you're seeking out funds, this is a little bit of a trick question. How much should you ask from any one funder? Just type it in the chat as a percent. 10%, 50%, 100%, what do y'all think? I shouldn't have given you the clue that it's a trick question, should I have? Okay, well, the rule of thumb, I've got one brave soul. And it depends on the fund and their guidelines. You're absolutely right. Some funders won't fund more than 10%. All right, I would put to you that in general, in the middle of the road example that we're dealing with today, you should not ask a funder for more than 30% of the program costs. And this is how I'm starting off this discussion of sustainability by warning you, emphasizing, whatever you want to call it, that to ask a single funder to support the entire project is almost certain suicide. Why is that? You got to figure if they're going to give you money, they're, excited, they want to help, they want to partner with you on solving this problem. But what does your asking them for all the funding tell them? What does it suggest to them? Are other people in the community interested? Maybe not, if no one else is stepping up, right? What if they can't fund you at 100%? Do some kids not get to eat? I see the box flashing. Yeah, Sarah, you're right. That tells them you don't have any other funding. And it also tells them, if you ask for 100%, that you're not planning on seeking any other funding, right? If the funder doesn't renew, you'll have a bigger hole to fill next year. Absolutely right. So sustainability is not only about the life of the grant, of the project beyond the grant, but as I teach it, it is about the life of the project today. Okay, funders want to see that you have community support, and the best way to demonstrate that is by showing them in your budget and in this discussion a good mix of funding sources that are already committed, pending, or planned. All right, coming back to the discussion we just had about things happening in the future. No, you're not going to go into writing a grant with all the money in the bank already. Otherwise, why would you be seeking funding, right? Or all the other grants out, on all the funding sources secured. No, you're 6 months, 8 months out, right? But at this point, you do need to at least have a plan, right, for how you're going to sustain this program into the future. And in your budget, which we'll talk about next week, and in this narrative about sustainability, you're going to want to outline and delineate the sources that you plan to approach, have approached, have made commitments, or that I planned, pending, and committed. There are 3 different sources. And those could be other foundations. Those could be corporations that you're seeking support from, individuals, both the major gifts or portion of the unrestricted funding that comes in from individuals. It could be an event. It could be ticket sales. It could be earned income of some kind, right? The important thing is to note that you need to discuss this, right? You don't want your funder thinking they're it. So a good sustainability plan will go into a narrative about everything that you're going to show in your revenue budget when we get to it next week. All right? Everybody with me on that? Anybody nervous about having to talk about money that has not yet come in? Good. Oh, y'all are awesome. Okay. You're nervous, Anne? Is that what the of course is for? Yes. Well, but there's a saying something. If you're not nervous, it's not working or something like that. I put the same here. All right. So sustainability we've talked about, which brings us to the end of the grant narrative per se, with the exception of evaluation. So we now do have some time, about 10 minutes, to take your questions. And go ahead and unmute or type in the chat if you prefer. I've really flown through this, so think back on the need statement and the project description and tell me what your burning questions are. Nothing is stupid, nothing is trivial. You got me? take advantage of it.
In each time we take on a project, we have started a mobile pantry for to help fight food insecurity. That's my main goal. That's what I focus on, and that's what our organization does. But we always do a SWOT analysis to find out how much the project would cost, what is our strength, what is our weakness, what other opportunities there are, what threats there is. Because a lot of times people do it in marketing, but it's good to do it each time you have a project, because things can change. We are stepping into, and you have the same compassion as I do, is feeding the children. We have We Count Two program where we bring hot meals to urban and rural areas where there is a lack of food accessibility. So in our SWOT analysis on the last project we did one with a Shag Senior Center, and we found what our strength was, we found out what our weakness was, we found out what our opportunity was, and we found out what our threat is. And one thing about doing that, because you can have a program in the summertime, but also there could be a mad tornado. Like, just say you're feeding children healthy vegetables. So the threat is the weather. They had a hurricane. Now you don't have that access to healthy vegetables no more. So what will be our other plan B? So each time that Eagle's Nest takes on a project, we always do a SWOT analysis, and I share that with everyone. That's the best way to plan a project, because you may have somebody working with you today, and tomorrow you might be by yourself. So that doesn't mean that will the kids still eat? You still have to go. You may not reach the same capacity that you wanted to reach when you had 2 people. Now you're down to 1. So will you still feed the same 100 people when you had a 2-man team? Now you have a 1-man team. So what are you going to do? Well, we have to stretch out longer hours. So the program's still going to go forward. So that's kind of a little.
No, I agree with you.
Yeah.
I think you're absolutely right. And I just want what you're reminding me of is that, this little series, what I've been doing with y'all, is kind of restricted to grant writing, and God knows I could talk about just grant writing for hours and hours. And what we don't have the scope to go into is how grant writing, and indeed all fundraising, aligns with an organization's strategic plan or strategic objectives. Why am I bringing that up? Because both for the fundraising department and for the organization at large, a SWOT is often and should be routinely done just for the reasons you're talking about, right? And your grant writing program, which we're focusing on, is really going to take a lot of information from that and incorporate it into your writing. Your program folks are going to say, hey, we can't, because of the hurricane, we can't provide vegetables, or because we're down 1 person, we're going to have to stretch out our hours, right? And the program people should be talking to the grant people, who should be making allowances in their narrative to support those folks. Am I making sense? It's like a big domino chain that, right? That happens. And,
right.
And obviously it's going to depend on the size of your organization. Maybe you are the program team and the grant writing team and the marketing team that does the SWOT. I don't know. Or maybe you have other folks that are doing that information that you can collaborate with that will inform your fundraising, and be very helpful materials to get you in touch with what's going on in the community. I'm telling you, when I was writing grants, and I know it annoyed my boss like you can't believe, I spent more time just wandering around talking to people. What's going on with y'all? What's shaping up for next year? What obstacles are you coming across in this new program, and how can we work those out so that it happens? And a lot of people would say, why are you screwing off so much? Oh, I'm not. I'm getting very important work done. So, and it was successful. So absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. You are very welcome. I hope that, that it's been helpful. We've got 4 more minutes. I do have, just so you believe me, a whole slide of resources here as well. And if any of you are going to be seriously engaged in grant writing, and feel like you need some help, I would seriously encourage you to spend, I think it's, $30 to get Susan Howlett's book. And I'm not getting any kickbacks for this, so there's nothing in it for me. But I use this wallet for teaching it. It is one of the best grant writing sources that I've ever come across. Susan talks through every little point that you need to know. Candid also has a online proposal writing course down here at the bottom. That's free. So after we finished our time together, if you still have questions or need further in-depth knowledge, you're welcome to reach out to me, but you also might want to check out some of those resources too. Let's see, more questions. I have to scroll down to the bottom of the chat box. Everybody feel like they can go research and write a fabulous need statement and compellingly talk about their project now? Big show of hands, celebration, those little things going off that the emoticons are.
Well, of course, as Angela mentioned, this presentation will be emailed out to you with her contact information. So if you guys have additional questions or concerns, definitely feel free to reach out to her.
Absolutely. That's why they pay me the big bucks. So please do. All right. Well, I'm thrilled that y'all decided to join us. I hope you'll come next week to learn about budgeting and evaluation. I don't know if they need to register again, do they, Araya?
No, we have taken upon ourselves to register everyone who registered for the first event, so you should be registered. But if you don't think that you are, or you did not get the new Zoom link, go ahead and re-register or shoot me an email if you have questions. But it should be, and the Zoom link happens right after you register, so a lot of times it will go to your spam or your junk box, but it definitely happens right after you register. And again, we appreciate you guys for joining us, and you guys enjoy the rest of your day. I still see some sun out there in Joy's car, so I'm glad we're going to get out with a little bit of sun.
Thank you, everyone. We'll see you next week. Thanks so much.
All right, bye.
Well, Miss Angela, I will be reaching out to you